Foundations of Glass. The rain tapped against the skylight of Julian Mercer's cramped studio apartment, creating a symphony that matched the scratching of his pencil across tracing paper. It was 3 in the morning, but time had lost meaning as he reworked the design that would either secure his first major commission or confirm his father's prediction that architecture was a pipe dream for dreamers with trust funds. Julian had neither dreams nor funds to spare, just determination and Sophia Reyes, who slept on the threadbare couch beside his drafting table. Sophia had brought him coffee at midnight before finally surrendering to exhaustion. Her dark hair spilled across the cushion, one arm dangling toward the floor where her medical textbooks lay scattered. Even in sleep, her brow furrowed slightly, the permanent mark of someone carrying the weight of overnight hospital shifts, medical school loans, and a boyfriend whose ambitions consumed every room. They had met 3 years ago at a campus coffee shop, he sketching buildings that defied gravity, she memorizing anatomical structures. Their connection had been immediate, 2 strivers who recognized the hunger in each other's eyes. "You're going to change the way people experience space," she had told him on their 3rd date after he showed her his designs. No one had ever believed in him so completely. Julian set down his pencil and stretched, his back cracking in protest. The Westridge Tower proposal was due in 48 hours. If his small firm won, it would put him on the map. If they lost, he'd have to let go of his 2 employees and possibly surrender the studio space he could barely afford. He knelt beside Sophia, gently brushing hair from her face. She stirred but didn't wake. "I'll make it worth it," he whispered, more to himself than to her. All of this waiting. Their life had become a series of postponements. Vacations delayed, dinners canceled, anniversaries marked with rain checks. Sophia never complained, even when she spent holidays alone while Julian worked, or when they had to move to a smaller apartment to keep his business afloat. "We're investing in our future," he would say, and she would nod, squeezing his hand, in solidarity. But lately, something had shifted. The squeeze lingered longer, her eyes asking questions her voice wouldn't form. Last week, when he'd missed her graduation ceremony because of a client meeting, a meeting that could have been rescheduled, she'd simply nodded and said, "I understand." But the space between them had grown wider than the bed they rarely shared. The following morning, Sophia woke to find Julian still working, his eyes rimmed red. "Have you slept at all?" she asked, her voice husky with concern. "I'll sleep when I'm dead," he replied with a tired smile. "Or when Westridge accepts our proposal." She made them breakfast, simple eggs and toast, and placed a plate beside him. "You need to eat." "Later," he said, not looking up from his calculations. Sophia stood there for a moment, the steam from her coffee rising between them like a signal no one was receiving. "Julian, we need to talk about next month." He continued drawing. "My fellowship in Boston. I need to find an apartment. We never discussed if you're—" "Boston's only a few hours away," he interrupted, finally glancing up. "We'll make it work. Just let me get through this proposal." "That's what you said about my graduation and the trip to visit my parents and—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "This isn't just about logistics. It's about us, about where we're heading." Julian set down his pencil, feeling the familiar weight of guilt. "Sophia, you know how important this is. Just a little longer, and things will be different." "You've been saying that for 3 years. Her voice wasn't accusing, just tired, resigned. "And I've been believing it." She placed her coffee mug in the sink and gathered her keys. "I have a double shift. Don't wait up." As the door closed behind her, Julian turned back to his drawings, telling himself he would make it up to her after the deadline. He'd take her somewhere nice, maybe that restaurant by the harbor she'd mentioned months ago. The Westridge design would be his masterpiece, a tower of glass and steel that seemed to defy gravity, with gardens spiraling up its exterior. He was creating something that would outlast him, something people would remember. What he didn't realize was that some foundations were already cracking beneath his feet. Blueprints abandoned, the Westridge Tower Commission changed everything. Julian's design, a revolutionary spiral of glass and sustainable gardens, won unanimously, catapulting his small firm into architectural stardom. The morning after the announcement, his phone rang incessantly with congratulations and new client inquiries. Champagne arrived from former professors who had once criticized his impractical vision. But the celebration in his apartment felt hollow. Sophia's side of the closet was empty. Her medical journals no longer stacked beside the bed. 3 weeks earlier, she had left a letter on his drafting table while he was at a presentation. "Julian, I've accepted the fellowship in Boston. I'm leaving today. For 3 years, I've watched you pour your heart into buildings while our foundation crumbled. I can't keep waiting for a future where I'm more than an afterthought. I don't regret loving you. I regret that it wasn't enough for either of us." Sophia. He had called her 37 times that day. She answered once, her voice quiet but resolute. "Please." He had begged. "The Westridge decision is next week. Once that's settled—" "It will be something else," she interrupted. "There will always be another building, another client, another reason to postpone our life. I can't do it anymore. I'll come to Boston. We'll start over." Her silence had stretched across the line before she finally spoke. "No, Julian, I need to build something of my own now." The call ended, and with it, their relationship of 5 years. Now, as Julian stood in his new office overlooking the city skyline, Westridge Tower rising in the distance, success tasted like ashes. He hired more staff, expanded to a downtown location, and buried himself in work to avoid the emptiness of his penthouse apartment. 18 months after Sophia left, Julian Mercer became the youngest architect to win the Pritzker Prize. Magazines featured his revolutionary approach to vertical urban spaces. He dated occasionally, a gallery owner, a visiting professor, a model who appreciated his jawline more than his buildings. None lasted longer than a few months. "You're impossible to reach," his last girlfriend had said while collecting her things. "Even when you're physically present, you're redesigning the world in your head." He didn't bother denying it. On rainy nights, Julian would find himself searching for Sophia online, though he promised himself he wouldn't. Her medical fellowship had been extended. She'd published research on pediatric cardiac care. She'd run a marathon for charity. In every photo, she looked vibrant, purposeful, lighter somehow, as if she'd shed a weight he hadn't realized she'd been carrying. There was never any mention of a relationship, which gave him a selfish comfort he was ashamed to acknowledge. Until the night his assistant, Daniela, mentioned she'd seen something about Dr. Sophia Reyes while scrolling through social media. "She's engaged to that French hotel magnate, the one who builds those eco-resorts. Raphael Moreau? They met when she was doing humanitarian work in Haiti after the earthquake. Quite romantic, actually." Julian's hand froze on his keyboard. "How do you know about Sophia?" Daniela looked uncomfortable. "You mention her sometimes, when you're working late or stressed about deadlines. I just noticed the connection when I saw the announcement." That night, Julian found himself staring at the engagement announcement. Sophia stood beaming beside a tall man with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. They were on a beach at sunset, her simple white dress billowing. In the wind, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. Raphael Moreau had built an empire of sustainable luxury hotels while funding clean water initiatives across the globe. The caption read, "Two worlds becoming one." Paris, June 15th. Something cold and final settled in Julian's chest. He had always assumed, somewhere in the recesses of his mind, that they would find their way back to each other, that once he'd established himself, built his reputation, he could finally offer her the life she deserved. He had constructed elaborate fantasies of their reunion, him appearing at her hospital, explaining how everything he'd built had been for their future. But there would be no reunion. Sophia had found someone who hadn't made her wait for happiness. 3 days later, Julian shocked his team by announcing he was taking a sabbatical. He arranged for his partners to oversee current projects and booked a flight to Paris. He told himself it was for inspiration, that the City of Light would help him conceptualize his newest project. But as the plane descended toward Charles de Gaulle Airport, Julian admitted the truth to himself. He needed to see her one last time, to understand what he had lost before he could truly move forward. What he didn't expect was that Paris, the city of love, would become the city where he finally confronted the wreckage of his choices and the irreversible reality that some buildings, once demolished, can never be reconstructed. Reflections in Paris, Paris in June was exactly as the poems described. Golden light spilling across limestone facades, the Seine reflecting centuries of art and ambition, gardens bursting with impossible color. Julian wandered through Marais and Montmartre, his architect's eye absorbing the city's perfect imperfections, the way history and modernity coexisted in stunning harmony. But he wasn't there for architectural inspiration. The Hotel Lumière, Raphael, Moreau's flagship property, rose like a dream near the Jardin des Tuileries. 9 stories of restored 19th-century grandeur with a modern glass atrium that housed an indoor forest. Julian stood across the street, studying its facade. He had researched Moreau extensively during the flight. The man had transformed hospitality with his philosophy of luxury that leaves no footprint, creating hotels that generated more energy than they consumed. In another life, Julian would have admired him, perhaps even sought a collaboration. Instead, he felt a complicated jealousy toward the man who had given Sophia what he couldn't: presence, partnership, priority. Monsieur Mercer? A voice startled him from his thoughts. Julian turned to find a slender woman with a tablet, her expression professionally curious. "I'm Claudine Devereaux, events director for Hotel Lumière. Monsieur Moreau asked me to extend an invitation if I spotted you." Julian's stomach dropped. "He knows I'm here?" Claudine smiled diplomatically. "Paris is smaller than it appears, especially in architectural circles. Your presence at Le Corbusier retrospective yesterday was noted." She handed him an envelope. "The rehearsal dinner is tonight at 8. Garden Terrace. Monsieur Moreau thought you might appreciate the structural elements of the space." Her knowing eyes suggested she understood more than she revealed. Before Julian could formulate a response, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving him holding an invitation he never expected to receive. That evening, dressed in his finest suit, Julian entered the Hotel Lumière, following the soft music to the garden terrace. Strings of lights hung between ancient trees, illuminating tables arranged around a central fountain. Laughter and conversation flowed as easily as the champagne. And then he saw her. Sophia wore a simple blue dress, her hair loosely gathered at the nape of her neck. She moved through the crowd with grace, stopping to embrace guests, her smile, genuine and unrestrained. She looked happy, not the cautious, measured happiness she'd shown in their final years together, but an expansive joy that transformed her. Julian remained at the periphery, suddenly unsure why he had come. What did he expect? That seeing her would provide closure? That he might discover she was secretly unhappy? "She doesn't know you're here." Julian turned to find Raphael Moreau beside him, offering a glass of champagne. In person, Moreau emanated a quiet confidence, his accent lilting as he continued, "I thought it best to speak with you first." Julian accepted the glass, studying the man who had succeeded where he had failed. "Why invite me at all?" Raphael gestured toward a quieter corner of the terrace. Sophia mentioned you once, after we became engaged. She said you were the most brilliant architect she'd ever known, but that you built walls as expertly as you designed them." His smile held no malice. "I recognized your name when the concierge mentioned you were in Paris. I was curious." "About what?" "About the man who shaped so much of her past." Raphael's gaze was direct, but not unkind. "Sophia is complete in herself. She arrived in my life fully formed, confident in her value. I've always wondered what forged that strength." Julian looked away, watching Sophia across the terrace. "I can't take credit for that. If anything, I tested it beyond reason." They stood in silence. Two men connected by a woman neither fully understood. "Will you tell her I'm here?" Julian finally asked. Raphael considered this. "That depends. Are you here to disrupt or to understand?" The question cut through Julian's defenses. Why had he come? To win her back? To apologize? To prove to himself that he'd moved on? "I don't know anymore," he admitted. Raphael nodded as if this was the answer he expected. "Then perhaps you should discover that before approaching her. The ceremony is tomorrow at sunset. You're welcome to attend, as long as your presence brings no pain to Sophia." With that, Raphael rejoined the celebration, leaving Julian alone with his reflection in the window pane. A successful man who had built monuments to his vision while neglecting the foundation of his heart. Julian left the rehearsal dinner without speaking to Sophia, walking aimlessly through Parisian streets until dawn broke over the city. As light spilled across the Seine, he realized he had a decision to make: leave Paris immediately or stay and face the consequences of choices made. Years ago, when he believed time was an endless resource and love an immutable constant. The Garden of Second Chances. The Moreau-Reyes wedding was held in the botanical gardens of an 18th-century estate outside Paris. Guests gathered beneath a canopy of ancient oaks, surrounded by roses and lavender that perfumed the summer air. Julian sat in the last row, partially hidden by a stone column, his invitation held loosely in hands that had designed skyscrapers but failed to build a lasting home. He had spent the day wandering the Musée d'Orsay, losing himself in impressionist landscapes that blurred reality into something softer, more forgiving. He'd considered leaving a dozen times, booking the next flight to anywhere else. But some gravitational pull kept him tethered to Paris, to this moment of reckoning. The string quartet began Pachelbel's canon, and guests rose as Sophia appeared at the garden entrance. Her dress was understated elegance, ivory silk that caught, the golden hour light, no veil to obscure her radiant face. She walked alone down the petal-strewn aisle, a choice Julian recognized as quintessentially Sophia. She had always forged her own path. As she passed his row, time seemed to suspend. For the briefest moment, her eyes met his, a flicker of surprise, then something unreadable crossing her features before she continued forward toward Raphael. The ceremony was intimate and personal. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, speaking of serendipity and second chances, of finding each other when neither was searching. Raphael's voice caught when he promised to treasure each day as the gift it is, never postponing joy. Sophia spoke of building a partnership where both could grow without dimming the other's light. Julian felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred, not just a wedding, but the culmination of choices made and paths taken that had led these two people to each other while leading him elsewhere. At the reception, Julian kept to himself, nursing a glass of champagne at a table near the garden's edge. He watched Sophia move through the celebration, her happiness so evident it was almost tangible. This was not the woman who had left that letter 3 years ago. This was Sophia fully realized, unburdened by compromise. "She saw you during the ceremony," Julian turned to find an elegant woman in her 60s beside him. Her accent was distinctly American, but with the polish of someone who had lived internationally. "I'm Eleanor Reyes, Sophia's mother," she continued, studying him with eyes identical to her daughter's. "I recognized you from the photographs she kept." Julian stood awkwardly. "Mrs. Reyes, You broke her heart," Eleanor stated matter-of-factly. "But hearts heal, and sometimes they grow stronger at the broken places." Julian swallowed. "She looks happy." "She is." Eleanor's gaze softened. "But that doesn't mean you were just a footnote, Julian. You were a chapter, an important one." Before he could respond, Eleanor nodded toward the garden path. "She's alone for a moment. If you have something to say, now might be your only chance." Julian found Sophia at a small fountain tucked behind a hedge of white roses. She stood with her back to him, trailing her fingers through the water. "Congratulations," he said softly. She turned, unsurprised. "I wondered if you'd approach me." Her voice was warm but measured. "Raphael told me you were at the rehearsal dinner. He invited me. He's not what I expected." A smile touched her lips. "What did you expect?" "Someone less generous," Julian admitted. "Less secure." "He has nothing to fear," she said simply. The words settled between them, weighted with truth. Julian looked at the woman who had once been the center of his world, familiar, yet transformed, like a building he'd designed that had been renovated beyond recognition. "I didn't come to disrupt your happiness," he said. "I think I came to understand it." Sophia studied him, her gaze penetrating as always. "And do you understand?" Julian considered the question carefully. "I'm beginning to. You deserved someone who could be present, who wouldn't ask you to wait for a future that was always just beyond reach." "It wasn't about deserving," she corrected gently. "It was about choosing. Every day we choose what we build and what we neglect. You chose your work, not because you didn't love me, but because you couldn't love anything more than your vision." The truth of her words struck him with physical force. "I thought I was building something for us." "No," she said, her voice kind but firm. "You were building monuments to your ambition. I was just the scaffold. Necessary during construction, but ultimately temporary." From across the garden, Raphael appeared, his eyes finding Sophia with magnetic precision. He hesitated when he saw Julian, but Sophia gave him a reassuring smile. "He's waiting for you," Julian observed. "Yes," she agreed, "but he doesn't just wait. He walks beside me." She touched Julian's arm briefly. "I hope you find someone who makes you want to do the same." As she turned to leave, Julian found his voice one last time. "Sophia, I'm sorry I made you wait for a future that never arrived." She looked back, her expression peaceful. "Don't be sorry, Julian. Be different." Then she was gone, moving across the garden toward her husband, her future, her choice. Julian remained by the fountain long after sunset, watching fireflies emerge like floating embers against the darkening sky. For the first time in years, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble, making way for something new to be built in their place. Designing a future, Julian returned to his firm transformed, not dramatically in ways others could immediately perceive, but fundamentally, like a building whose supporting structure had been redesigned. His team noticed subtle shifts. He left the office before midnight, declined projects that didn't align with his evolving vision, and most surprisingly, delegated responsibilities he would have previously insisted on handling personally. 6 months after Paris, he gathered his partners to propose a new direction, architecture that prioritizes human connection over monumental ego. "You want to build smaller?" asked Thomas, his longest-serving partner, clearly confused. Not smaller, Julian clarified, spreading renderings across the conference table. More intentional. Spaces that foster community, that acknowledge how people actually live rather than how we think they should live. The designs showcased affordable housing with communal gardens, a medical center with healing spaces for families, and most ambitiously, a proposal to transform abandoned industrial sites into mixed-use developments that integrated residential, cultural, and commercial elements. This isn't what clients expect from Julian Mercer, warned Daniela, though her eyes revealed admiration. Julian smiled. Perhaps it's time I stopped designing for expectations. That winter, he declined an invitation to create a luxury skyscraper in Dubai, a commission that would have defined his earlier career. Instead, he accepted a modest project redesigning a community hospital in Boston. He told himself the location was coincidental. It wasn't. On his third site visit, Julian found himself in the pediatric cardiac wing, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a working hospital. He had been studying the traffic patterns of medical staff, trying to design spaces that would reduce their daily strain, when he heard a familiar laugh. Dr. Natalie Winfield, the chief of pediatric surgery, followed his gaze down the hallway where the sound had originated. That's Dr. Reyes Moreau, our miracle worker. She divides her time between here and Paris, leads our international program. Julian's heart stuttered. She's here permanently? Dr. Winfield shook her head. 3 months here, 3 in France. Her husband runs humanitarian initiatives through his hotel chain, so they've created quite the partnership. They just established a pediatric cardiac center in Haiti. Before Julian could process this information, Sophia rounded the corner, deep in conversation with a resident. Her hair was shorter now, her white coat bearing the embroidered name, Dr. Reyes Moreau. She stopped abruptly when she saw him. Julian. He found himself speechless, despite having imagined this moment countless times. Dr. Winfield looked between them, sensing the charged atmosphere. You two know each other? Old friends, Sophia supplied, her composure returning. Julian is an architect, a brilliant one. He's redesigning our eastern wing, Dr. Winfield explained, including your department. Something flickered in Sophia's eyes. Surprise, wariness, curiosity. Is that so? Julian finally found his voice. I didn't know you were here. I can request a reassignment if... That won't be necessary, she interrupted, professional but not cold. Your work is exceptional. The hospital deserves that. Dr. Winfield excused herself, leaving them in an island of awkward silence amid the hospital's constant motion. Congratulations on the Haiti project, Julian offered. That's remarkable work. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Thank you. It's been challenging but fulfilling. Raphael's connections have opened doors we couldn't have accessed otherwise. How is he? Julian asked, surprising himself with the genuineness of his interest. Wonderful, she answered simply. We're expecting our first child in summer. The news hit Julian with unexpected force. Not jealousy this time, but a profound recognition of time's passage, of lives continuing their inevitable forward motion. I'm happy for you, Sophia. Truly. She studied him carefully, as if assessing the truth of his words. You seem different. I'm trying to be, he admitted. Paris was illuminating. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. How long are you in Boston? As long as the project requires. I'm taking a more hands-on approach these days. Sophia checked her pager as it beeped. I have to take this, but perhaps we could have coffee sometime? I'd be interested to hear about your new approach. It wasn't forgiveness or friendship exactly, but it was an opening. A possibility Julian hadn't dared hope for. Over the following months, they established a cautious professional relationship. Coffee in the hospital cafeteria became occasional. lunches discussing the pediatric wing design. Julian met Raphael during one of his visits to Boston and was surprised by the genuine respect that developed between them. When Sophia gave birth to a daughter, Lucia, Julian sent a mobile of delicate architectural wonders that hung above the nursery. One evening, as Julian worked late in his temporary Boston office, his assistant interrupted with an unexpected visitor, Veronique. "Laurent, the artistic director of Paris's Centre Pompidou. I saw your community design exhibition," she explained after introductions. "It's unlike anything in your previous work. There's a humanity to it that's quite compelling." She proposed a retrospective, The Evolution of Vision, Julian Mercer's Architectural Journey. "I'm not sure my work warrants a retrospective," Julian demurred. "I'm still evolving." "That's precisely why it's interesting," Veronique countered. "Few architects of your stature risk reinvention mid-career. Your willingness to deconstruct your own legacy is fascinating." 6 months later, Julian stood in the Centre Pompidou, surrounded by models and renderings that chronicled his journey from ambitious young architect to celebrated visionary to his current transformation. The exhibition culminated in a scale model of the Boston Hospital wing, with its innovative spaces designed for healing, connection, and community. During the opening reception, Julian found himself approached by a woman with intelligent eyes and an artist's paint-splattered hands. "Your hospital design moved me," she said without preamble. "My brother spent his final months in a sterile room with one small window. I would have given anything for him to have a space like the one you've created." Her directness was refreshing. "I'm Camille Rousseau. I design healing gardens for cancer centers." "Julian Mercer," he replied, immediately interested in her work. "I know who you are," she smiled, "though you're not who I expected." "No? Your earlier work was impressive but cold. This," she gestured to the hospital model, "this has soul." They spoke for hours about the intersection of architecture and healing, about spaces that nurture rather than simply shelter. Julian found himself fully present in the conversation, not mentally redesigning or improving, but listening and connecting. When Sophia and Raphael arrived at the exhibition with baby Lucia, Julian introduced them to Camille without awkwardness or regret. As the 4 adults conversed about potential collaborations between their various projects, Julian realized something profound. He had not lost Sophia. He had found himself. Later that night, walking along the Seine with Camille, Julian stopped to admire the city lights reflecting on the water. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That some of the most beautiful structures aren't buildings at all," he replied. "They're the connections between people, how we support each other, create space for growth, weather storms together." Camille's hand found his in the darkness. "For an architect, you're becoming quite the philosopher." Julian smiled, feeling the future unfold before him like a blueprint, not rigidly defined as his earlier designs had been, but flexible, collaborative, and alive with possibility. "I'm learning," he said, "that the most important foundation isn't laid in concrete, but in presence." As they continued their walk, Julian understood what Sophia had tried to tell him years ago. Life wasn't about constructing perfect monuments to ambition, but about building spaces, physical and emotional, where love could flourish in the present, not in some distant promised future. And for the first time, he wasn't waiting to live. He was simply fully alive.